Sarah Whitmore adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder and checked her diamond-encrusted watch for the third time in 2 minutes. The charity gala had run later than expected, and now she was standing outside the Grand Metropolitan Hotel at nearly midnight, her patience wearing thin as she waited for what she considered an appropriate ride home to her penthouse apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side. The evening had been typical for someone of her social standing, exchanging pleasantries with fellow members of New York's elite, writing checks for causes that looked good on her social media, and ensuring she was photographed with all the right people. Sarah had inherited her wealth from her late father's pharmaceutical empire, and at 32, she had never worked a day in her life, though she kept busy managing her various investments and serving on the boards of several exclusive organizations. As she stood beneath the hotel's golden awning, her silk evening gown catching the light from the chandeliers visible through the lobby windows, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The vehicle was immaculate, its paint gleaming under the streetlights, and it bore the distinctive markings of Elite Metropolitan Cab Company, one of the city's most respected transportation services. The driver, a well-dressed black man in his late 40s, stepped out and walked around to open the passenger door. Marcus Johnson moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years in customer service, his uniform crisp and professional. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying temples that spoke of experience and wisdom earned through years of hard work. "Good evening, ma'am," Marcus said with a warm smile, gesturing toward the open door. "I'm here to take you wherever you need to go." Sarah looked at him with undisguised disdain, her nose wrinkling as if she had detected an unpleasant odor. She pulled her fur stole tighter around her shoulders and took a step back from the vehicle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "but I think there's been some mistake. I called for a proper car service, not this." Marcus maintained his professional composure despite the obvious slight. He had encountered discrimination before in his years of working in various capacities within the transportation industry, but it never got easier. "Ma'am, Elite Metropolitan is one of the finest car services in the city. We pride ourselves on—" "I'm sure you do," Sarah interrupted, waving her hand dismissively, "but I have certain standards. I don't ride with, well, let's just say I prefer drivers who are more suitable to my social position." The words hung in the air like poison, and Marcus felt the familiar sting of prejudice. Other hotel guests were beginning to notice the commotion, some stopping to watch the scene unfold. The doorman, a young man named Carlos who had witnessed similar incidents before, looked uncomfortable but uncertain about whether to intervene. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the hurt he felt, "I assure you that you'll receive the same high-quality service that all our clients expect. Elite Metropolitan has been serving New York's finest families and businesses for over 15 years. Sarah laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the hotel's facade. 15 years of what, exactly? Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I simply cannot be seen riding with someone like you. It would be inappropriate for someone of my standing." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. "I'll call for a different service, one that understands the importance of proper presentation and cultural fit." Marcus stood silently for a moment, processing the rejection. He thought about his journey to this moment, the years he had spent driving taxis to put himself through business school, the long nights spent studying financial reports and market analyses, the countless rejections from investors who couldn't see past his background, and finally, the breakthrough that had allowed him to build something extraordinary. "I understand," he said finally, his voice calm and professional. "I hope you have a safe journey home, ma'am." As he moved to close the passenger door, Sarah was already speaking to another car service on her phone. "Yes, this is Sarah Whitmore. I need immediate pickup from the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, and please ensure you send someone appropriate. I've just had a rather unpleasant experience with another service." Marcus got back into his sedan and pulled away from the curb, but he didn't leave the area immediately. Instead, he parked across the street and waited, partly out of professional concern for ensuring the client was safely picked up, and partly out of curiosity about what would happen next. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Sarah paced back and forth under the hotel awning, making increasingly agitated phone calls. The temperature had dropped, and despite her fur stole, she was beginning to shiver. The doorman approached her several times, offering to help her find alternative transportation, but she waved him away each time, insisting that her proper ride would arrive momentarily. By 45 minutes, Sarah's confidence was beginning to waver. The car service she had called claimed their driver was on the way, But traffic was unusually heavy due to a street festival in Midtown that had ended around the same time as her gala. Two other services she contacted were completely booked for the evening, and a third had quoted her a price that was triple the normal rate due to surge pricing. From his vantage point across the street, Marcus watched the scene unfold. He could have driven away, could have returned to his office to handle the administrative work that always awaited him at the end of the day. Instead, he found himself thinking about his mother, who had cleaned offices in this very building when he was a child. She had taught him that dignity wasn't something that could be taken away by others' words or actions, it was something you carried within yourself. His phone buzzed with a text from his night dispatcher. Got 3 more calls for pickups in the Midtown area. Thompson and Rodriguez are both tied up with airport runs. You available? Marcus looked back at Sarah, who was now sitting on a bench outside the hotel, looking defeated and cold. He thought about the various ways this evening could unfold. He could simply drive away and let karma take its course. He could assign one of his other drivers to pick her up, ensuring she never knew he owned the company she had rejected. Or he could do something that might actually make a difference. He texted back, send the Midtown addresses to Rodriguez when he's free. I'm handling a special situation. The hour mark had passed when Marcus pulled his sedan back up to the hotel entrance. Sarah looked up hopefully. Then her face fell when she recognized the same driver she had rejected earlier. Ma'am, Marcus said, stepping out of the car once again. I notice you're still waiting for your ride. Given the lateness of the hour and the fact that the temperature is dropping, I'd like to offer my services once more. No charge. Sarah stared at him, her pride warring with her practicality. Her feet were aching in her expensive heels. She was genuinely cold, and the prospect of waiting indefinitely for another service was becoming less appealing by the minute. I told you before, she said, though with less venom than earlier. I have certain standards. I understand, Marcus replied, and I respect your right to choose your transportation. But I also believe that sometimes our standards might prevent us from experiencing something unexpectedly positive. There was something in his tone, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there during their first interaction, that made Sarah pause. She looked at the immaculate vehicle, then at Marcus himself, really looked at him for the first time. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and there was something about his bearing that spoke of education and refinement. If I were to accept your offer, she said carefully, it would be purely out of necessity, nothing more. Of course, Marcus agreed. May I ask your destination? The Pinnacle Towers on 5th Avenue, she said, naming one of the most exclusive residential buildings in the city. As they drove through the mostly empty streets of Manhattan, Sarah found herself stealing glances at her driver. The interior of the car was luxurious, with leather seats that were more comfortable than those in her own BMW. The classical music playing softly through the premium sound system was the same station she listened to at home. Despite herself, she had to admit that the service was impeccable. Have you been driving for Elite Metropolitan long? She asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Quite some time, Marcus replied, navigating smoothly through the light traffic. I've been with the company since its founding. And before that? I drove for various services while putting myself through school. Business school. Actually, this caught Sarah's attention. Business school? Which one? Columbia. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Columbia Business School was one of the most prestigious in the country. She herself had attended Barnard College, Columbia's sister institution, though she had studied art history and had never finished her degree, finding it unnecessary given her financial circumstances. What did you study? She asked, genuinely curious now. Finance and operations management, with a focus on transportation logistics. The conversation continued as they made their way uptown, and Sarah found herself increasingly intrigued by this driver who spoke knowledgeably about market trends, urban planning, and the evolution of New York's transportation infrastructure. When he mentioned having read several books on business strategy that were also in her personal library, she began to see him in an entirely different light. You seem quite overqualified to be driving a taxi, she observed as they turned onto 5th Avenue. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile of the evening. That's an interesting assumption. What makes you think this is the limit of my ambitions? Before Sarah could respond, they had arrived at her building. The Pinnacle Towers rose 45 stories into the Manhattan sky, its Art Deco facade speaking of old money and established power. The doorman, recognizing Sarah, stepped forward to assist her. As Marcus held the car door open for her, Sarah found herself hesitating. The ride had been surprisingly pleasant, and she was beginning to feel uncomfortable about her earlier behavior. "Thank you," she said quietly. "The service was adequate." "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus replied. "I hope the rest of your evening is pleasant." As Sarah walked toward her building, she turned back once to see Marcus getting into his car. Something nagged at her, a feeling that there was more to this encounter than she understood. The next morning, Sarah woke with an unusual sense of unease. Her normal routine of yoga, a light breakfast prepared by her housekeeper, and browsing through social media felt somehow hollow. She kept thinking about her conversation with the cab driver, Marcus. She remembered his name was Marcus and feeling increasingly ashamed of her initial reaction to him. Over her morning coffee, she found herself Googling Elite Metropolitan Cab Company. The company's website was sophisticated and professional, featuring testimonials from some of New York's most prominent citizens and businesses. The fleet consisted of luxury vehicles, and the drivers were described as carefully selected professionals committed to providing exceptional service. What caught her attention most, however, was a recent article in the New York Business Journal about the company's expansion into sustainable transportation and its innovative approach to urban mobility. The piece mentioned that Elite Metropolitan had been recognized as one of the city's fastest-growing minority-owned businesses. Sarah clicked on another link that led to a profile of the company's founder and CEO. The page was loading slowly, but when the image finally appeared, she nearly dropped her coffee cup. Staring back at her from her laptop screen was Marcus Johnson, the same man she had insulted and dismissed the night before. The article detailed his remarkable journey from driving night shifts to pay for business school to building one of New York's most successful transportation companies. It mentioned his innovations in route optimization, his commitment to hiring and training drivers from diverse backgrounds, and his company's partnerships with several major hotels and corporations throughout the city. Sarah read further, learning that Marcus had grown up in the Bronx, the son of a single mother who worked multiple jobs to support her family. He had earned a full scholarship to Columbia and had started Elite Metropolitan with a single-used sedan and a business plan he had written as his graduate thesis. The company now operated over 200 vehicles and employed more than 400 people. The weight of her behavior the previous evening hit her like a physical blow. She had not only insulted a successful businessman but had done so based purely on her own prejudices and assumptions. The man she had deemed inappropriate for her social standing was, in fact, far more accomplished than she was. That afternoon, Sarah did something she had never done before. She called Elite Metropolitan directly and asked to speak with the owner. She was transferred to an assistant who informed her that Mr. Johnson was in meetings but could return her call later in the day. "May I ask what this is regarding?" the assistant inquired. Sarah hesitated. "It's personal. Could you please tell him that Sarah Whitmore called? He'll know who I am." When Marcus returned her call that evening, Sarah was sitting in her penthouse overlooking Central Park, having rehearsed what she wanted to say dozens of times. "Ms. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice professionally cordial. "I understand you wanted to speak with me." "Yes," Sarah began, her voice smaller than usual. I owe you an apology, a significant one." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's not necessary, Ms. Whitmore. I've encountered similar situations before. But it is necessary," Sarah insisted. "What I did last night was inexcusable. I made assumptions about you based on nothing more than prejudice, and I behaved in a way that was not only wrong but deeply hurtful. I had no idea who you were, but that's no excuse. Even if you had been just a driver, my behavior would have been equally unacceptable." Marcus listened quietly as Sarah continued, her words tumbling out in a rush of genuine remorse. She talked about her privileged upbringing, her lack of real-world experience, and her growing realization that her attitudes and assumptions were not only harmful to others but were limiting her own growth as a person. "I don't expect forgiveness," she concluded. "I just wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong I was, and that I'm committed to doing better." When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Ms. Whitmore, I appreciate your call more than you might realize. Apologies like this are rare, and the fact that you took the time to learn about my background and reflect on your actions suggests that you're serious about change." "I am," Sarah said emphatically. Is there anything I can do to make amends?" Marcus considered this. "Actually, there might be. Elite Metropolitan is launching a new program to provide transportation services for job interviews and medical appointments for people who can't afford reliable transportation. We're looking for sponsors and board members who can help us expand the program. It's not glamorous work, it won't get you featured in society magazines, but it makes a real difference in people's lives. Sarah felt a spark of genuine interest, something she hadn't experienced in years of charity galas and social obligations. I'd like to learn more about that. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself drawn into a world she had never experienced before. She attended board meetings in Marcus's downtown office, a converted warehouse space that buzzed with activity and purpose. She met drivers who were working their way through school, single mothers trying to build better lives for their children, and immigrants pursuing the American dream with determination and hope. The transportation program, which they named Bridges, aimed to eliminate one of the often overlooked barriers to employment in healthcare: reliable transportation. Sarah was amazed to learn how many people missed job interviews or medical appointments simply because they couldn't afford a taxi or didn't have access to reliable public transportation. As she worked alongside Marcus and his team, Sarah began to understand the complex logistics of running a transportation company. She learned about route optimization, driver scheduling, vehicle maintenance, and the dozens of other details that went into providing reliable service. She also began to appreciate the skill and professionalism required to be an excellent driver, something she had never considered before. Marcus, for his part, found Sarah to be a quick learner and a valuable contributor once she applied herself to understanding the business. Her connections in the city's social and business circles proved helpful in securing funding and partnerships for the Bridges program, and her genuine enthusiasm for the work was evident to everyone involved. 3 months after their initial encounter, Sarah and Marcus were working late in his office, finalizing the details for the official launch of the Bridges program. The walls were covered with route maps, schedules, and photographs of some of the program's early success stories. "I never imagined I'd find this kind of work so fulfilling," Sarah admitted as she reviewed a spreadsheet of potential partner organizations. "My previous charity work always felt so superficial. This actually makes a difference." Marcus looked up from his laptop. "You've made a remarkable transformation, Sarah. When I first met you, I'll admit I thought you were just another privileged person who had never been challenged to see beyond your own circumstances." "You weren't wrong," Sarah said with a rueful smile. "That's exactly what I was. The question is, what changed me?" "I think," Marcus said thoughtfully, "you changed yourself. I might have provided the catalyst, but the willingness to examine your beliefs and change your behavior, that came from within you." The launch event for the Bridges program was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the same place where Sarah and Marcus had first met. The irony wasn't lost on either of them as they stood together in the same spot where Sarah had once refused his service, now working as partners to help others access opportunities. The event drew representatives from major corporations, social service organizations, and media outlets. Sarah had used her social connections to ensure attendance from New York's philanthropic community, while Marcus had invited community leaders, drivers, and early program beneficiaries. During her speech, Sarah did something unprecedented. She told the truth about how the program had started. She spoke openly about her initial encounter with Marcus, her prejudiced assumptions, and the journey of self-discovery that had led her to this work. 6 months ago, she told the assembled guests, "I was someone who judged people by superficial characteristics and lived in a bubble of privilege that prevented me from seeing the humanity and potential in others. I nearly missed the opportunity to work with one of the most innovative and compassionate business leaders in our city because I couldn't see past my own biases." The audience was silent, clearly moved by her honesty. Sarah continued, "The Bridges program isn't just about providing transportation, it's about building connections between people and opportunities, and recognizing that everyone deserves the chance to pursue their dreams regardless of their current circumstances." As applause filled the room, Sarah caught Marcus's eye. He nodded at her with respect and something that might have been pride. The woman who had once refused to ride in his car had become not just a colleague but a friend, and their partnership had created something meaningful that would help thousands of people. The program's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Within the first year, Bridges had helped over 500 people attend job interviews, with a success rate of over 70%. The medical transportation component had ensured that hundreds of families could access healthcare they might otherwise have missed. Other cities began inquiring about replicating the program, and Sarah found herself traveling to conferences and speaking at events about the importance of addressing transportation barriers. Marcus's business continued to grow, and Elite Metropolitan became known not just for luxury service but for its commitment to social responsibility. The company's success story was featured in business magazines and case studies, with Marcus often speaking about the importance of looking beyond traditional metrics to measure a company's impact. For Sarah, the transformation was profound and lasting. She completed her college degree, studying social work and urban planning. She sold her penthouse and moved to a smaller apartment, donating much of the proceeds to expand the Bridges program. Her social media presence, once filled with glamorous photos from charity events, now featured stories of program participants and updates on their successes. The friendship between Sarah and Marcus deepened over time, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. They often reflected on their first meeting and marveled at how a moment of prejudice and rejection had ultimately led to something beautiful and meaningful. Years later, when Sarah was asked to speak at a conference about overcoming prejudice and building bridges across social divides, she would always begin with the same story, about a night when she refused a ride from a black cab driver, not knowing he owned the company, and how that moment of shame became the catalyst for the most important work of her life. It was a reminder that our worst moments can become doorways to our best selves, if we have the courage to walk through them.